Today we look at NBA players who were expected to be very high draft picks coming into the league, but fell way down on draft night for one reason or another. And there's no better way to start off than with Nerlens Noel, who was supposed to go first overall, but fell all the way to 6th. And it wasn't pretty. You see, Noel was the #1 ranked player in high school his senior year, then pretty unanimous to go first, maybe second, in the 2013 draft. But the night started with the Cavs coming out of nowhere and picking the biggest bust of all time. And as the night went on, Nerlens continued to sit and wasn't looking happy as other players' names continued to get selected before his. Then once his name was finally called, it was actually only so he could get traded to Philly. So who knows if he would have fell even further. It was weird to see the guy that was supposed to go first to actually be taken 6th, but scouts got this one right. Noel was a monster defender in college, averaging 4 blocks a game, but his lack of offense at only 10 points a night was concerning, as well as the fact that he had tore his ACL in that season for Kentucky. And now years into his career, the man's only ever averaged double digits once, only had over 2 blocks a game once, and never averaged double digits in rebounds. He's been a bench player ever since year 3, so I think those first 5 teams actually made a good choice here, well, except the Cavs. But the crazy part was that most people never saw that draft slide coming, but there was actually a lot of people who could have seen Gilbert Arenas' drop coming. I mean, he played great in his first 2 years in Arizona, so much so that he declared for the NBA draft, where he was expected to be picked in the first round and even considered for the lottery, but instead he dropped to the second round and was taken 31st overall by the Warriors. It was really no surprise though that every team passed on him because they didn't want to use a first round pick on him. For years the story was that teams messed up on letting him slide, and throughout his early career Gilbert Arenas was a man on a mission to prove them all wrong. Well, that was until recently when Richard Jefferson brought to light what actually happened and explained that in pre-draft workouts Gilbert came in out of shape because the NBA season wasn't even close yet, and for that reason made it known that he didn't want to do any of the workouts and didn't try at all when he was doing them. Then there was even a point where he was being interviewed by someone in the NBA and he was asked what he wanted out of the league, to which Gilbert said, "I want to be a pimp." So it's not shocking at all that Arenas went in the second round, and if anything, maybe it's a surprise he didn't fall further. But speaking of players who've gotten dropped by the NBA, Paul Pierce originally got drafted 10th overall into the league, but it was pretty unexpected that he was drafted that late. Sure, top 10 is still great, but after putting up a stellar season at Kansas and proving to be one of the top players in college basketball in 1998, almost everyone had him going top 5, and some even considered the Truth to be a top 3 pick that year. And just based on what he had done up until that point, it would have been a very justified decision. Plus, with how things turned out, it would have made a lot of sense too, especially when looking at some of the names taken ahead of him. But speaking of the Boston Celtics, they were also the ones that drafted Gerald Green originally with the 18th overall pick. Well, it's crazy because early on going into the draft that year, Gerald was expected to be drafted with a lottery pick somewhere between 5th and 10th coming out of high school. And that was because he was the 2005 #1 high school basketball recruit in the nation. And he looked like a superstar in high school, being able to jump out of the gym and averaging 33 points, 12 rebounds, 7 assists, and 3 blocks a game in his senior season, while also winning the McDonald's All-American Dunk Contest that year. He looked like a freak athlete and NBA teams wanted him, which is why he entered the draft. And the predictions for him were high, but he decided to only work out for the teams with the top 6 picks in the draft that year. It made him look bad, and he paid for it, which was why he fell all the way to 18. But it was right about where he belonged anyways. He only looked like a superstar in high school because he was a freak athlete. And it was a good thing he didn't play in college, or he probably would have gotten exposed. Another player that didn't play in college was RJ Hampton, who finished up high school as a top 5 recruit and was expected to play 1 year in college, then be a guaranteed top 5 pick in 2020. But that all changed once he turned down schools like Kansas, Memphis, and Texas Tech so he could go play overseas in the NBL against grown men. It's a move that usually hasn't been a great one for NBA players and wasn't great for RJ either. It was a decision like that while also saying the NBL wasn't a very talented league that could have possibly turned scouts away. But it's also the fact that these athletic 6'6" point guards usually haven't worked out, and the league had recently just seen the exact story play out with Dante Exum, so most teams were smart to not fall for the same thing. After his questionable decisions, he went from a projected top 5 pick to a projected lottery pick. But on draft night, he instead now fell to the 24th pick in the draft. And seeing how he's now on his 4th team in 3 years, it's probably a good thing he wasn't drafted any higher. But at least he was drafted in the first round because Bol was called a taller Kevin Durant as a 6'10" 14-year-old. Then was a viral high school basketball player for his entire 4 years. And after being a 5-star recruit and ranked the 4th best player in his class, he went to Oregon, where he played center but played like a guard and averaged 21, 10, and 3 before his season ended thanks to a foot injury. And even headed into the NBA draft, Bol was invited into the green room as a projected lottery pick, wore an $80,000 suit on draft night, then didn't even get picked at all, because instead he was taken as the 44th pick, which is one of the biggest draft slides slides we've ever seen. Bol Bol had so much hype and had been talked about all year as the new type of player that was going to evolve the NBA, but scouts weren't buying it at all, and they didn't, which is why no one picked him up. Scouts just saw him as somebody that was too undersized to play in the front court and too slow to play in the back court, and as it turns out, they were right. Then there's a guy like Christian Wood whose game does translate pretty well to the NBA. He's pretty close to a 20 and 10 guy. It's just a shame that his attitude problems have been a major detractor for his career, and apparently it's actually always been that way, which is why he went undrafted. You see, when he started playing well in Detroit, it seemed like he was getting his comeback story. He was the guy that everyone thought fell under the radar, so he got undrafted and worked his way up through various teams and the G League until he finally got an opportunity on the Pistons. But I don't think that was the case, because Wood played 2 seasons in college, and at first he was projected to get drafted late in the first round. Then that fell into second round projections. And then draft night came and he didn't get taken at all. But with him now being that 20 and 10 guy and not getting picked up for months in the offseason because apparently his attitude problems are that bad, I'm almost certain his pre-draft workouts just didn't go well, and then teams got to meet him and all of them just wanted to stay away. So I don't think his whole story was as great as it was first made out to be. In other recent news, just this past draft, Cam Whitmore was the guy that slid way further down than anyone thought. He was the guy that was pretty unanimously projected to be a lottery pick, with some people having him go as high as top 5. But when he wound up going 20th to the Rockets, it left people surprised. But I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that his game is really raw at this point and requires him to rely on a lot of pure athleticism. And as we've seen in the past with guys like Gerald Green that I mentioned earlier, that usually doesn't cut it in the league where everyone, for the most part, is on a pretty level playing field athletically. But there was that, and reports afterwards came out that he had extremely lackluster team workouts and interviews across the board. And as we've seen already with guys like Gilbert Arenas and what I just mentioned with Christian Wood, yeah, that's all that it takes to have a major drop in the draft. But you know, sometimes it's just the quality of play that causes a player to drop. Just look at what happened to Cole Anthony. The dude was the #1 high school prospect as a senior and was playing so well in high school that at the same time it got him projected to go first overall in his year's NBA draft. But then he went to North Carolina and had such a lackluster season that his draft stock plummeted. It was a combination of so many things. In college, he took bad shots, he averaged 4 assists and 3.5 turnovers a game, only shot 35% from 3, wasn't able to elevate a subpar team, partially tore his meniscus mid-season, and only led his team to a 14-19 record. So it was a nightmare season for him, and it went just about as bad as you could have imagined for a former projected first overall pick, which was why he slid all the way down to 15 and honestly could have gone even further. It's a shame, but I've said since his rookie season, he's a backup point guard in the NBA at best. Now, injuries can also cause a player to fall in the draft. Just look at Michael Porter Jr., who is being touted as a future superstar ever since he was in high school. As a senior, he averaged 36 and 13, led his team to a perfect 29-0 record, and shared the spot for top recruit with Marvin Bagley. And he was so phenomenal in high school that he only played 2 games in college before having back surgery and was still projected to be a top 5 to 8 pick in the talented 2018 draft. And a drop there would have made some sense with the injury concern, but it was still pretty surprising to see him fall all the way to 14th that night to the Denver Nuggets. Sure, the top 5 was extremely stacked in 2018, but 14th made him be seen as a major steal for Denver, and still does to this day. So we've seen attitudes, injuries, and play affect where a player is drafted. But then there's even cases like Rashard Lewis that prove some players can just majorly slide for no reason at all. Because Rashard was a great recruit and expected to go top 10 in 1998 and would have deserved it. But as the night kept going on, he kept falling, and his hometown team of the Rockets even passed up on him 3 separate times. It got so bad that Lewis went to the bathroom and cried at one point. The only reason I can see of why he fell 20 plus spots from where expected was maybe because he was coming out of high school and teams just didn't want to deal with that. Now, I know there's so many that I've missed because there's multiple every year, but these were some of my favorites. What are the most notable ones that you can think of? Comment down below and let me know, and I'll catch you next video.